She came back for the money. She found something she could never buy back. Linda Reid did not call ahead. She simply arrived at Thomas Reid's front door on a Sunday afternoon, stepping out of a rented silver sedan while the sky was already bruising toward rain. Her heels were cream-colored and expensive-looking. Her coat was cut well. Her sunglasses were large enough to cover the upper half of her face, and she carried a leather bag pressed against her side like a document she needed to keep dry. She had spent considerable time assembling that appearance. Thomas saw past it in about 4 seconds. The tip of one shoe was scuffed. The left cuff of her coat was fraying at the seam in a way that suggested it had been worn too many times without the maintenance that ownership demanded. Her hair was perfect in the way. Hair becomes perfect when a person has worried over it far longer than they should have for a Sunday drive. And her smile, the one she produced the moment she saw the front door begin to open, was the smile of a woman who had come not because she missed someone, but because she needed something and had convinced herself those two things were close enough. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, because this story is for everyone who has ever stood at a door they once walked away from and called what they felt nostalgia, when really it was his only want. Thomas Reid opened his front door. He was 49 years old, broad-shouldered, dressed in a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. His hair had gone silver at the temples in the years since Linda had last seen him. His face had deepened, the kind of deepening that comes not from defeat but from sustained effort. From early mornings and late nights and the specific weight of raising a child alone while the world watched and waited for him to fail. His hands still showed the work. There was a faint dusting of flour on his right thumb and wrist, which meant he had been baking before she rang the bell, which meant her arrival had interrupted something ordinary and warm and entirely his own. He looked at her. He did not smile. He did not look away. He simply said her name, Linda. She slipped her sunglasses off. Her eyes were the same. Her smile flickered, recalibrated. Thomas. The silence between them lasted long enough to be its own conversation. Linda looked past his shoulder into the interior of the house. She had imagined in the drive over what it would look like. She had told herself it would be ostentatious, that a man who had just sold a piece of his company for the kind of number people gossiped about would have turned his success into a display. Marble floors, perhaps, a vaulted ceiling, the architectural language of a man saying, "Look what you left." It was none of that. The interior of Thomas Reid's house was a kitchen with warm light falling across old hardwood floors that had been sanded and sealed but not replaced. There were photographs on the walls, none of them professionally framed. A faded navy dish towel hung from a hook beside the door. The air carried the smell of tomato sauce reducing on a stove, of bread in the oven, of basil, of a household that cooked real meals on a Sunday because it was Sunday, and that was what Sundays were for. It was the smell of a life being lived inside it. That bothered Linda more than marble would have. "I heard you sold the company," she said. Thomas wiped his hands on the dish towel by the door. "Sold a portion. A portion big enough that people are saying you're done working." People say a lot of things when they're not the ones doing the paperwork. Linda produced a small laugh. It dropped between them and did not land anywhere comfortable. She stepped slightly closer. The rain was beginning in earnest now, tapping at the roof of the front porch, pressing the afternoon inward. "I thought we should talk," she said. "About what?" "About things that were left unfinished between us." Thomas regarded her with the particular stillness of a man who had at some point in the past waited for something so long that waiting had carved itself into his posture and stayed there even after the waiting was done. There was no urgency in his face, no performance of indifference either. Just a clear and quiet distance, the kind that is not built in a day. "I don't remember anything left unfinished," he said. "You signed the papers. I signed the papers. You took the car. I kept the debt. You left." Linda's jaw tightened at the edges. "You don't have to make it sound so transactional." "It's not a complaint," Thomas said. "It's a sequence." She looked down at her bag, then back up. "I didn't come here to fight. Then you came for money." The directness of it made her flush. Not the words themselves. She had rehearsed for those. But the tone, which was not cruel, which was not triumphant, which was simply the tone of a man who no longer needed to soften things for the comfort of someone who had not earned that softness. "I'm having a difficult time," Linda said. Thomas once did not respond immediately. The rain thickened behind her. A gust moved the hem of her coat. She held herself very still against it. From somewhere inside the kitchen, a woman's voice called out without particular urgency. "Thomas, the sauce is going to catch if you leave it on high for another 5 minutes. Also, whoever is at the door, either invite them in out of the rain or give me a reason to take the extra bowl off the table." Linda turned toward the voice. The woman who appeared in the kitchen doorway was perhaps a year or two younger than Thomas, maybe 45 or 46. She was holding a wooden spoon. She wore a blue apron dusted lightly at the hip with flour, and her hair was pulled back in a loose knot at the base of her neck. She was not wearing makeup in any quantity that announced itself. She was not wearing jewelry that declared anything. She wore the kind of expression that belonged to someone completely at ease in the room she occupied, not performing ease, not performing anything. She looked at Linda with calm, clear eyes. "I'm Claire," she said. "Claire Bennett." The name arrived in Linda's chest like a key turning in a lock she had forgotten she owned. Claire Bennett. The woman from the third floor of the old building on Maple Avenue. The one who had lived in apartment 304 when Linda and Thomas had lived in 306. The woman who had offered to watch Miles on Tuesday evenings when Thomas had a second shift. The woman who had left a pot of soups outside their door the winter Miles had the flu, and Thomas had sat in the hallway because he could not afford a doctor and was afraid to go inside and show his son how afraid he was. The woman whom Linda, in a careless and revealing moment, had once described to her sister as the type who collects other people's broken things because she doesn't have anything of her own. Linda had said that sentence. She remembered it now with the particular sharpness of things we wish we could unknow about ourselves. Thomas stepped back from the door, not quite an invitation, but not a barrier either. "Claire's staying for dinner," he said. Claire looked at him, then at Linda. "I've been staying for dinner," she said, "for about 16 years. Linda's throat went dry. She looked around the entryway with new eyes. There, on the wall to the left of the kitchen doorway, a photograph of Thomas younger, holding a boy of perhaps 4 or 5 years old in front of an old pickup truck. The boy was laughing. Thomas was laughing too, which was a version of him Linda had nearly forgotten existed. Beside it, a picture of Thomas and Claire standing in front of a building with a hand-painted sign she could not quite read from this distance, both of them grinning at something outside the frame. And to the right of the kitchen door, half hidden by the angle, a photograph from what appeared to be a graduation, Thomas on one side, Claire on the other. Between them, a young man of perhaps 21, tall and serious-eyed, holding a rolled document and smiling the specific smile of someone who has understood for a long time exactly what the moment cost. There were no photographs of Linda in this house. Not because anyone had removed them. They had simply not been taken. She had not been there for them. Thomas watched her look at the photographs. He did not say anything. "You're married?" Linda said. "No." Something shifted in her expression. The kind of involuntary recalibration that happens when a door appears to still be unlocked. But Thomas said before she could do anything with it, "Not because I was waiting for you." Claire set the wooden spoon on the counter inside. She did not return to the kitchen. She stayed in the doorway. "He spent a long time getting to not waiting," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who considered accuracy a form of respect. "I'm not going to pretend that part didn't happen." Linda looked at Claire for the first time since the name. Really looked. Not the glancing inventory she had performed in the first seconds, assessing clothes, skin, bearing, filing the results under category, but looked at the woman herself. Looked at the way she stood in that doorway as if she had been standing in it for 16 years and had earned the right to every inch. This was not a woman who had appeared after Thomas became successful. This was not a woman collecting the reward at the end of someone else's story. This was a woman who had been present for the chapters Linda had walked out of and chosen never to return to. The chapters with no money in them. The chapters with a sick child in a small apartment and a man who did not know how to stop holding on. Linda had heard Thomas sold his company and thought she was coming back to find the ending. She understood, standing on that porch with the rain pressing in behind her, that she had missed the whole story. Thomas stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "It's raining." She stepped inside. The kitchen table held 3 plates. Claire moved without comment to set a 4th. 18 years earlier, the kitchen Thomas Reid had stood in was not this one. It was a narrower room in a narrower apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled of old carpet and other people's cooking. The refrigerator ran slightly too loud and cooled unevenly, so anything stored on the left side came out icier than intended. The window above the sink looked at a brick wall. There was a small table with 2 chairs and a high chair they had bought secondhand when Miles was born, and the high chair was still there 3 years later even though Miles no longer needed it. Because they had not gotten around to selling it, and also because money for anything discretionary had been replaced by money for things that were necessary, and then by the slow, grinding realization that there was not always enough for those either. Thomas had come home that Thursday evening from a job he no longer had. The Collinwood facility had posted the shutdown notices that morning. 42 workers, 39 of them men with families, were given a box to collect their personal belongings and a week's severance pay that the company's legal team had spent considerable energy making sound more generous than it was. Thomas had driven home in the old pickup that was already 2 payments behind, parked it in the lot, and sat in the cab for a while before going inside. He went upstairs. Linda was standing in the center of the bedroom. Her suitcase was open on the bed. It was not half-packed, not mid-process. It was fully packed, everything inside the zipper drawn except for the final 12 inches at one corner. She had been waiting. "Em compte som nutanenua," she said, then stopped, then said it in the language they always used with each other. "I can't keep doing this." Thomas looked at the suitcase, then at her. "I have an interview next week," he said, "and I've been working out an idea. Refrigerated truck maintenance, the small carriers, the food distributors who can't get emergency service from the big outfits. I know the systems. I can do this." Linda looked at him with an expression he had seen before and not known how to name. He could name it now, looking back across 18 years. It was not anger, it was not contempt exactly. It was the face of a person who had made a decision and needed the other person to give them a reason that would hold. "An idea doesn't pay the rent," she said. "Not yet. Thomas." She said his name like a door closing. "I didn't marry you to become the wife of a man who was always almost about to do something." He stood very still. He had the quality, even then, of a man who absorbed blows without displaying them. "You need me to be stable, or you need me to be somebody different." She looked at the suitcase. She did not answer. Miles was asleep in the next room. He was 3 years old and had recently learned to put himself to sleep with a small gray rabbit tucked under his chin, which he had named, with the solemn confidence of a toddler, Rabbit, as if the animal's function was sufficient identity. Linda walked past Thomas, took the handle of the suitcase and pulled it off the bed. "When you're stable," she said at the door, "call me. We'll talk about what happens next." What happened next was that she did not answer when he called. Thomas put Miles to bed that night with a story about a farmer who could not grow anything for a very long time, who kept planting anyway, who eventually grew the kind of wheat that fed the whole county. Miles fell asleep before the county part. Thomas sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark for several minutes, listening to his son breathe, which was the one sound in the world that reliably made everything else bearable. He went to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. There was half a container of leftover rice, a quarter stick of butter, 3 eggs, and a wilting scallion. He thought about making something. He thought about what the week looked like without an income. He thought about the interview. He thought about the refrigerated truck idea, which was not only an idea. He had been drawing schematics in a composition notebook for 6 weeks, pricing parts suppliers, mapping service gaps in the regional distribution network. The idea was real. The problem was that real ideas still needed time, and time required getting through weeks like this one first. He closed the refrigerator and sat down on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet. He was not sure how long he sat there. Long enough for the apartment to go completely quiet around him. Long enough to understand that this specific quiet, the quiet of a household that had contracted overnight from 3 people to 2, was going to be the sound of his life for a while. There was a knock at the door. He did not move at first. Then he thought it might be Linda, changed her mind, left the car, come back, and the thought moved him to his feet faster than he would have liked. It was Claire from across the hall. She was holding a pot with a towel wrapped around the handles and a small orange bottle of children's fever reducer. "I heard Miles earlier," she said. "He was coughing pretty bad around 7, I thought, in case." She held out the medicine, then she held out the pot. "And I made too much soup." Thomas looked at her. He was not a man who liked being seen in the middle of things. He had been taught by the particular school that life runs for men who look like him, in places that were not built for them, that being seen in the middle of things invited conclusions that were hard to correct afterward. Being seen struggling at the door of his apartment with soup from his neighbor felt dangerously close to that. "I don't need charity," he said. Claire regarded him with the expression of someone who had not offered charity and was not going to argue about it. "I didn't say charity. I said soup. I made too much. The pot needs to come back when you're done." She set both items on the floor beside his door and turned to go back to her apartment. He picked up the pot before she reached her door. "Thank you," he said. She glanced back. "Good night, Thomas." That was how it started, not dramatically, not with a declaration or a turning point. It started with a pot of soup, a bottle of children's ibuprofen, and a woman who seemed to understand the precise distance between helping someone and diminishing them. In the weeks that followed, Claire did not involve herself in Thomas's life in any comprehensive way. She was not that person. She knocked on his door on a Thursday evening when he had a job interview and no one to watch Miles. And she said she had nothing going on until 9 if he needed someone. She told him, when he mentioned the refrigerated truck idea with the slightly defensive preface of a man expecting skepticism, that she had a customer at the small accounting office where she worked part-time who ran 3 food trucks and complained constantly about maintenance costs. She gave Thomas the man's house number. She mentioned without ceremony, when she saw the composition notebook open on his kitchen table during one of the evenings, Miles was telling her about his day in the breathless monologue of a 4-year-old, that the schematics looked thought through. She was not effusive about it. She said it the way someone says a thing when they mean it and have no reason to add anything further. Thomas told her once, during a particularly bad week when a client he had just landed reneged on a services agreement, and he sat at his kitchen table with the paperwork and the numbers, and the very real arithmetic of what could not be covered if this kept up. He told her he did not know how to keep doing it. Claire sat across from him at the table. She did not immediately produce comfort or a reframe. "Thomas," she said, "I'll help you get back on your feet, but I can't stand up for you. You have to do that part, and I am not going to spend my life being the shadow of a woman who already left." He looked up at her. "That's what you're using me for," she said, not unkindly. "Someone to hold things while you figure out whether you're worth fighting for. I understand it, but if you're going to actually fight, I'll still be here." He thought about that sentence for 3 days. Then he called the food truck owner. Then he drove out at 11 o'clock at night to fix a refrigeration unit on a catering van in a parking lot in the rain, because the owner had called in a panic, and Thomas's rate was the only one that didn't require a service contract and a 48-hour window. He slept 2 hours. He woke up and fixed 2 more calls. Miles, that winter, fell asleep in the back seat of the pickup 3 times a week while Thomas worked, and Thomas put a folded blanket and a small pillow back there, and Miles thought it was an adventure. The bank denied Thomas's first loan application. The officer cited insufficient business history, and in terms that were technically procedural, but delivered with the particular efficiency of someone who had already made up his mind, expressed doubt about the viability of the service model. Thomas drove home, put Miles to bed, and rewrote the business plan. He applied to a different institution 6 months later. That one also denied him. The officer at this location did not bother with the pretext of process. He simply looked at Thomas for a long moment after reviewing the file and said he wasn't sure the market was there. Thomas knew the market was there. He had 14 clients by then, all of them small, food distributors, restaurant supply companies, a regional grocery cooperative. All of them paying because he was the only service provider who answered at 2 in the morning and didn't charge triple for a Sunday. He kept the paper records in a manila folder. Every invoice, every payment receipt, every dispatch note, organized by date in a way that Claire had suggested after seeing him pull crumpled papers from the glove compartment one evening. On the 3rd application, he brought the folder. He brought it thick and organized and current. He did not bring an attorney. He did not bring a cosigner or a character reference. He brought what he had done, laid it on the desk without commentary, and let the numbers speak in whatever language the numbers spoke. The loan officer, a younger woman who read documents the way someone reads them when they are actually reading and not performing reading, approved a small business line of credit. Thomas called Claire from the parking lot. "It went through," he said. "Good," she said. There was something warm in the word, something that had nothing to do with the money. "Go get Miles. You two should have dinner somewhere nice tonight." He did. Miles ordered a cheeseburger at a diner that felt celebratory and ate it with the methodical happiness of a 6-year-old who did not understand why this night was different from other nights, but understood that his father was relaxed in a way that meant something. Thomas watched his son eat and felt something in his chest that he had been carrying so long he had started to mistake it for a permanent condition begin, very slowly, to loosen. The business grew the way honest things grow, not overnight, not dramatically, but through repetition, through showing up, through the credibility that accumulates when people discover you mean what you say. Reid ColdChain Solutions started as a single man and a toolbox. It became a 2-man operation, then 5, then 12. Thomas hired his first employee from a workforce reintegration program, a young man named Darnell, who had spent 2 years building a record that made every other employer in the county look at his application and immediately look away. Thomas taught him the systems from the ground up. Within 18 months, Darnell was training the next hire. Thomas did not become the kind of businessman who forgot what it felt like to be turned away. Every vehicle in the company fleet carried, in small letters near the rear cab door, the phrase he had written in his composition notebook on one of the worst nights: "Keep what feeds people moving." It was not a marketing slogan. It was a reminder. Claire managed the accounts through the years when there was no one else to do it. She sat at the kitchen table after Miles was asleep and reconciled invoices and flagged discrepancies, and told Thomas plainly when a client was late on payment and he needed to follow up, because he had a tendency to let things slide with clients he liked personally, and she had a tendency to notice when that was costing him money. She mended the administrative fabric of the company with the same practical competence she brought to everything, without ceremony, without asking for acknowledgement, because she was not doing it to be acknowledged. She was doing it because she was there, and it needed doing, and she had the skills. When Miles was 8, he handed Claire a drawing he had made at school. It was a family portrait, 3 figures in crayon, a tall, dark man, a shorter woman with dark hair, and a smaller figure between them. The teacher had asked the class to draw their family. Claire kept the drawing. She kept it for 13 years. On a winter evening when Miles was in his early 20s and had already begun working on the engineering side of the company, Thomas came home from a 20-hour dispatch run during a regional snowstorm, having driven personally to repair a refrigeration failure at a pharmacy that carried insulin for 400 patients in the surrounding area. He came home at 4 a.m. and found Claire asleep at the kitchen table with the accounts open in front of her and a pen still in her hand. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her for a while. He had spent a great deal of the preceding decade convincing himself that what he felt for her was gratitude or friendship, or the particular closeness of two people who have been through difficult things together. He had convinced himself that he was not in love with her, partly because it seemed too neat a resolution to a story that had cost too much to resolve neatly, and partly because he was still afraid, in a way he had never fully named, that if he let himself need someone again, they would do the calculation and find him not worth the cost. He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She woke up and looked at him. "You're back," she said. "I'm back." She straightened in the chair and looked at the account sheet in front of her, then back at him. "The pharmacy invoice is going to be your biggest single-day revenue ever." "I know." She looked at him then with the directness she had always had, the quality that had nothing performative in it. He said, "I don't have a lot to offer you except a life that is very tired," she said. "I've seen the tired life. I didn't ask for a different one." He reached across the cry table and took her hand. That was all. It did not require a declaration larger than that. Miles, who understood more than either of them credited him with at the time, came home from an overnight training program the following week, found Claire at the table and his father in the kitchen making breakfast, and said nothing. He simply sat down. He ate with them. He thanked Claire for the juice, and sometime in the following months, in a way that no one narrated or marked, the word Claire in his usage shifted from the name of a person in the house to the name of a person who was home. The nod from Vance Capital came 14 years after the first loan approval. Arthur Vance, whose firm specialized in infrastructure logistics, had been watching Reid ColdChain for 3 years before approaching Thomas. The minority stake offer was structured in a way that gave the company access to expansion capital, while keeping operational control and the training program. Thomas's particular insistence, entirely within Reid's authority. The coverage was limited to industry publications. Thomas did not hold a press conference. He shook hands, signed documents, and drove home. There was a photograph taken at the signing, a routine image of the principals in front of the Reid ColdChain building. Thomas in the center, his team around him. Arthur Vance to one side. Claire standing slightly to the right, not posed, not featured, in the background the way a person who has been present for everything tends to be in official photographs. Linda saw the photograph on a business news aggregator she followed because her ex-husband, the second one, or perhaps third, the distinction had become complicated, had been in logistics. She read the caption. She recognized Thomas. She enlarged the image. She found Claire in 3 seconds. In the weeks that followed, Linda's financial situation did what it had been doing for 8 months, getting worse. The loan she had co-signed as a favor and a show of good faith to a man she had believed was building something had instead been used to fund exits she had not anticipated and been left in her name. Her attorney had outlined the probable outcomes with the careful detachment of someone delivering a prognosis, and the probable outcomes were not good. $240,000 was the figure that appeared in the most recent demand letter, attached to a timeline that felt geological in its indifference to her circumstances. She sat in her apartment and looked at the demand letter for a long time. She thought about the people she could call. She made a list. She crossed names off the list. She came eventually to Thomas Reid's name, which was not on the list because she had not put it there. She had not put it there because acknowledging that it was the most likely source of help would require her to acknowledge why she was going to him and not to someone else. And that acknowledgement had a shape she preferred to approach from an angle. She rented the car on a Saturday. She drove on a Sunday. She did not call ahead because calling would require her to hear him say no in advance, and she had learned, at some point in the intervening years, that appearing in person at least created the possibility that someone would not immediately look for an exit. She arrived in the rain. She found Thomas at the door and Claire in the kitchen. She sat at the dinner table they had set for 3, and ate a meal she had not cooked while the woman who had been cooking in this kitchen for 16 years moved around the space with the easy fluency of someone who knew where every implement lived. The conversation through dinner was careful. Thomas talked about the training program, about a new contract with a regional hospital network. Claire talked about a book Miles had recommended to her, something about structural engineering and urban planning. Linda answered questions when she was asked them, and did not offer more than was asked. She watched the two of them speak across the table, with the familiarity of people who have argued about small things many times and learned each other's habits so completely that the arguments rarely escalate, because they already know the shape of the other person's reasoning and have made peace with it. She watched that and understood, in a way that had not been available to her from the parking lot of her apartment with the demand letter in her hand, that she had not made a poor financial decision when she left Thomas. She had made a poor life decision. The financial problems were simply the part that had finally brought her to a door she had no standing to walk back through. Miles arrived at 7 in the evening. He was 22. He was tall, taller than Thomas, though he had his father's stillness, that quality of occupying a room without demanding it. He wore a jacket from the company, which surprised Linda, though perhaps it should not have. He came through the side door without knocking, which meant that his presence in this house required no announcement. He stopped when he saw Linda. He looked at her with eyes that had seen photographs. Thomas had shown Miles photographs across the years, because Thomas believed a child deserved the knowledge of where they came from, even when the source of that origin had not remained to explain itself. Miles had a face that was doing no visible work. He was simply looking. "Hello," he said. Not Mom. Not Linda. Not any of the words that would have placed him somewhere on the map of feeling. "Hello." Linda stood. She moved toward him with the instinct that years had not fully suppressed, that maternal reaching forward. Miles did not step back. He did not lean into it. He stood where he was with the polite self-possession of a man who had worked out his own relationship to this moment long before the moment arrived and did not intend to be managed by it now that it had. She said, "You've gotten so tall," he said after a moment. "It's been 18 years they ate together." The meal was quietly strained in the way meals are when a table contains people who have different information about one another and different stakes in what gets said. Miles spoke to his father and to Claire in a way that made the texture of their daily life visible without intending to. A reference to a conversation they had all had the week before. A shared joke about something that had happened at the training yard. A look exchanged with Claire when Thomas said something self-deprecating that suggested the two of them had a long-standing agreement about how to handle that particular habit. Linda watched all of it. She was being shown something she had not bought a ticket to and was sitting in the audience of anyway. After dinner, while Thomas was in the kitchen and Claire was clearing the table, Miles sat across from Linda in the living room. He had a cup of coffee. He was not hostile. He was simply present, the way a person is present who has thought about a thing so much that the actual arrival of it is somewhat less overwhelming than anticipated. Linda said, "I know this is strange for you." Miles looked at his coffee. "It's not strange," he said. "I've imagined it enough times that it lost the ability to surprise me. I want you to understand why." "No," Miles said. He said it quietly, but without softness. "I don't need you to explain why you left. I've understood for a long time that you were afraid, and that you made a choice out of that fear, and that you told yourself the story that made it survivable. I understand all of that." He looked up. "What I never understood, what I actually want to know, is why, once Dad was on his feet, once there was something to come back to, you didn't, not for him, for me. He held her gaze. Because I need to hear that from you. Not from him. Not from a story he told to protect me. From you. Linda's eyes went wet. She looked at her hands in her lap. She did not have an answer. She had an explanation. She had several explanations. But explanations were the furniture of avoidance, and she could feel with terrible clarity that Miles was not asking her to furnish a room. He was asking her to walk into the one that was already there. I was ashamed, she said, finally. By the time I could have come back, I had been gone so long that coming back felt like admitting all the time in between was wrong, and I didn't know how to admit that. Miles looked at her for a long time. I know, he said. I figured that out around the time I was 14. He picked up his coffee again. I'm not going to tell you it's fine. It isn't fine. But I'm also not going to spend whatever years we might have left being angry at you for something I've already processed without your help. He took a drink. If you want to know me, you can start by asking me questions about my life before you tell me about yours. Linda nodded. Her throat was closed. Not tonight, Miles said. Tonight has been enough. He stood. He said goodnight to Thomas in the kitchen, said something quietly to Claire near the door that made her nod and put her hand briefly on his arm and left. Thomas came back into the living room and sat across from Linda. The house had gone quiet. The rain had stopped while they were at dinner, and the evening had turned clean and cool, the way evenings do after rain. He said, "How bad is it?" Linda told him the number, $240,000. She told him about the loan. She told him about the man who had left his signature off every document except the one that created the liability. She did not make herself smaller in the telling, but she did not omit anything that made her look like she had allowed it to happen. Thomas listened. He was still for a long time. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I need the honest answer. Not the one that gets you what you came for." She nodded. "Did you come because you trust that I'm a decent person, or because you heard I sold the company?" Linda looked at him. The most honest thing she had done in months was stay in his eye contact. "Both," she said, "and I hate myself for it." Thomas was quiet. "That's the most truthful thing you've said since you got here," he said. Claire appeared in the doorway. She looked at Thomas. He looked at her. Some patch of understanding moved between them that had the efficiency of two people who have been communicating this way long enough that the volume of what can be conveyed by a look has become considerable. Later that evening, Thomas stood with Claire in the kitchen while Linda sat in the living room. He told her what he was thinking. Claire listened. She did not offer a verdict. She said, "You can help her, but make sure you know why. If it's because she's in trouble and you have the means and it's the decent thing to do, then do it. If it's because you want her to finally see what she walked away from, then you're still letting her hold the wound." Thomas looked at the floor. "I don't think I want her to see anything anymore." "Then you know what this is." He went back to the living room. He sat across from Linda and told her what he would do. He would not give her the money directly. He would retain a lawyer he trusted to review the debt, examine the loan documents, and determine what legal recourse existed against the man who had structured it the way he had. If there was a legal avenue, she would have the support to pursue it. If the debt was legitimate and had to be paid, he would arrange for payment to be made directly to the creditor, structured as a low-interest loan with a clear repayment schedule. He would not give her access to a number. He would give her access to a process. "I don't trust you the way I used to," he told her. "That's not cruelty. It's just what's true. But I respect you enough not to throw money at you like it's compensation for something neither of us can undo." Linda sat with that. "What if I can't repay it? Then we'll figure out a structure that works. But you'll be accountable for it. Not to me personally. To the agreement." She nodded. There was something happening in her face that was different from what had been there when she arrived. The calculation was gone. What was underneath it was smaller and more honest. She turned to look at Claire, who had come to stand in the kitchen doorway. "I said something terrible about you once," Linda said. "About what kind of person stays and picks up after someone else's life. I said it like it was an insult." Claire was quiet. "It wasn't an insult," Linda said. "It was fear. I couldn't do it, so I made it small so that I wouldn't have to feel like I'd failed." She looked down. "You didn't pick up after anyone. You built something." "Yes," Claire said. "We did. I don't have a right to the parts I missed," Linda said. "I know that." "No," Claire agreed. "But you might have a right to what comes next if you approach it correctly. That's not my call. That's Miles's." 3 weeks later, Thomas held a gathering at the Reid ColdChain facility, a celebration of the training program's 10th cohort completing their certification. It was not a gala. It was catering from a local restaurant, folding chairs on the shop floor, the smell of machinery and food oil. and the sound of 2 dozen young people who had been taught something useful celebrating the fact that they knew it. Thomas stood at a small podium near the bay doors and said a few words about where the company had come from. He talked about the food truck owner who had given him his first real referral. He talked about Darnell, who was now a senior technician and had trained 3 of the people in the room. He talked about his son, who was in the back of the room looking at the floor with the embarrassed attention of someone trying not to be visibly moved. Then he talked about Claire. He said, "There is a version of this company story that begins with an idea and a toolbox, and that version is true, but it is not complete." He paused. "The more complete version starts in a kitchen on a floor I was sitting on because I didn't know what else to do. And it includes a woman who knocked on a door with soup and a bottle of children's ibuprofen, and very deliberately did not call it anything more than what it was." He looked at Claire, who was seated in the second row, and had the expression of someone who had been told this would not be embarrassing, and is currently being proven wrong in the most generous way. Claire Bennett managed the accounts when there were no accounts to speak of. She answered the phone when I was under a truck. She kept the books when keeping the books meant recording how little there was. He stopped. "If this company has a foundation, she is part of it. And I should have said that publicly a long time ago." Claire looked at him. Her eyes were wet, and she did not hide it, and she did not perform it either. It was just water, the way tears are when they are the accurate response to something. Linda was at the back of the room. She had been invited as a guest, with Miles's conditional agreement, not family, not a position of belonging, not yet, maybe not ever in the old sense, just present. She stood near the door and listened to Thomas speak, and she felt something she recognized, with the delayed clarity of the reluctant as grief, not for Thomas specifically, not for the marriage that had ended, for the version of herself that had stood in that apartment doorway with a packed suitcase and told a good man that almost didn't count. She was glad for him. She was. The gladness was cleaner anything she had felt in years. It had no agenda in it. Miles found her near the door as the gathering wound down. He handed her a cup of coffee. They stood beside each other watching the room. "You can come to the holiday thing in December," he said. "If you want, I'll be there. Claire will be there. It'll be a crowd. It won't be just us." "That sounds right," Linda said. "It won't be more than that for a while." "I understand." He looked at her sideways briefly. "You should get the lawyer Thomas mentioned. And you should actually use them, not just thank him for the gesture and then try to find a different angle." "I know." Miles drank his coffee. "Okay," he said. "December then." That night, Thomas and Claire drove home together in the quiet that comes after an event where a lot of things were said correctly. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the basil from Sunday's dinner. The photographs on the walls were the same photographs. The laughing boy in front of the truck, the 2 of them outside the building, the graduation with the young man between them. The house was the same house. Thomas said, "I thought, when she finally showed up, that I would feel something different." Claire set her bag on the chair by the door. "What did you feel?" He thought about it. "Like it was finally just a thing that happened a long time ago." Claire looked at him. "Not like I won," he said. "Not like she lost, just finished." She crossed the kitchen and put her hand against his face for a moment, the way you touch something you have chosen and keep choosing. "Good," she said. He put his hand over hers. There is a particular confusion that overtakes people who leave good things and return to find them still standing. They expect ruin. They expect bitterness, or at least the gratifying wreckage of a life that needed them in order to survive. What they find instead, when the person they left was the kind who kept going anyway, is not ruin. It is fullness. A table set by hands other than their own. A house that learned its warmth from someone else's presence. A family assembled in the missing years and asking nothing of them now except the basic honesty of beginning where they actually are. Linda had come to Thomas Reid's door for money. She found instead the precise accounting of everything she had chosen not to stay for. Not as an indictment, simply as a record. Thomas had not built his life in order to show her anything. He had built it because Miles needed to eat, and because Claire deserved someone who showed up, and because the world would not wait. He built it in the years when building meant bleeding, and then in the years when it meant dignity, and then in the years when it became the ordinary rhythm of a life that had chosen its direction and kept moving in it. He did not need Linda to see what he had built. He only needed to know that the woman who had helped him build it was in the kitchen when he came home, and that his son would be at the table in December, and that whatever he carried now was not dead at all. It was the weight of belonging to something that belonged back.